Hi, it's the Soul Whisperer, Amy Shaw here. Today I'm in my car again. If you're new to my channel, I often make videos in my car. Partly that's because I don't really have a quiet, dedicated space in my home. I share my home with family members, but also because I have an adult son with autism who has a lot of different appointments and activities that he's engaged in the community, and because he has psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, he's unable to drive, so I'm pretty much the taxi. And because he is an adult, these are things that he does that don't require me to be present with him, so I often will give him a ride and just sit in the car and wait for him, which gives me a lot of downtime, dedicated, uninterrupted time in my car, and so it's a perfect opportunity to make a video. So I apologize for the unpolished and unprofessional production of my YouTube videos, but sometimes that is the way it is, and this is me. This is my life, and this is who I am, and try to keep it as real as possible. So what I want to talk about today is Western shamanism. It's something that I've been thinking about for months, actually. So kind of what's culminating in my head really isn't new material in any way. But, as I've stated before, I choose to make videos sort of based on the synergistic and synchronous, events that start happening in my life. And they bring things into focus to such a degree that I say, oh, okay, now it's time for me to actually go make a video about this. Today I want to talk about it because there's been a lot of discussion on Facebook, I would say, over the last couple of months around what a shaman is. Because people come to this with such diverse experiences and ideas and practices, there's a real divergent range of definitions of what shamanism is and expressions of what that is, which have really caused me to step back within myself and evaluate it. I've said before many times that I've been a student of the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, which is Michael Harner's School of Core Shamanism. I'm really honored and grateful to be a part of the school, to have learned what I have learned from them. But it is a very technical school. They teach, very core technical concepts and practices for shamanism. They do not teach culture at all. I think fundamentally in the United States, that's a perfect thing and it's a good thing. And I think Michael Harner was incredibly wise to establish his school from that point of view of not teaching culture. Because in the United States, there's such a diversity of culture that it really allows the individual student to explore their own roots, their own lineages, and their own cultures, and to bring a unique, eclectic presence to shamanism in the West that is directly a reflection of the culture that we live in. It is very much a melting pot. But I use the term Western shaman a lot, and I use it loosely. And recently I had somebody contact me who was interested, and she was asking me, what is Western shamanism? I can't find any information on it. I think a big part of that is because it's sort of cutting edge. We are the second generation now of shamans that are stepping forward as the original shamanic individuals that brought it to the United States via Michael Harner are starting to age out. My own shamanic teacher here in the Texas area has retired. He's in his elderly years now, and he's had a really good long run, and he's just ready to settle into his life. So I think that a lot of the shamanic teachers, the first generation shamanic teachers that came out of the foundation in the 70s and the 80s, and even some in the 90s, they're aging out, and we're sort of the next generation that's stepping forth. And I think that we are bringing a different perspective. They were the first. And so for them, it was a different experience than it is for us, because we stand on their shoulders and all the work that they have done. And so we bring a whole different eclectic mix, and that whole millennial thing, and just, technology that's been at our disposal, and how that's opened us up to, be able to study different traditions and practices, as well as, the DNA stuff. 20, 30 years ago, it was very hard to get a DNA test. Now you just pay $100, send off, a little saliva, and you can find your whole entire history, dating back for centuries, all the way, to your African ancestors. So things have really, really changed since the first generation of the shamanic individuals in the United States have gone through, and got trained through the Michael Harner or whatever other methods. There's so many different ones now, the Four Winds Society, and which is much more cultural specific, but there are many other different shaman schools now and different paths, and it's just really grown, and it's beautiful to see the plethora and the expression. But it does call into question, what is Western shamanism? I'm just going to ramble a little bit here because articulating this is a little bit difficult, partly because, like I said, we are on the cutting edge of this. We don't have a really firm narrative. We don't have, sort of this firming up. I think we're in that process of firming it up. And so I'm going to have to ramble a little bit to get out everything that I've been thinking about that's in my mind. So the first thing I want to share is I had an experience this week by the same person that asked me what is Western shamanism, because she was researching it and couldn't find information on it. She also was, we were talking back and forth, and, as the conversation ensued, she did share with me that she did book a session with a shaman. I don't believe he was in America. I believe he may have been in a different country. And because she was in a different country, it was a distance session. So she told me that how he handled that is that he told her between a specific time, this time and this time for an hour, you just lay down. And I'm going to, go into the spiritual realm and do the shamanic work. So she did this. She complied. She laid down for an hour, tried to just relax, rest. At the end of the hour, he called her and he said, okay, it's finished. I did the work. And basically that was it. And so she was telling me that, some time had gone by, a couple days or whatever. And she said, I don't feel any different. Nothing changed and I don't feel different. And so it really got me thinking, because this is, in essence, how I have been trained to do distance work. At a very fundamental foundational level. Right away, as I was trained that way, I knew it intuitively that wasn't sufficient practice, and that wouldn't be the way that I could handle my distance work. The majority of the work that I do actually is distance work, and I think that's because, in this internet age, people Google and search, and they find me in all these different social media platforms and this and that, and so they reach out to me. And so it's a good thing. But it's not my preference. My preference is actually to do individual one-on-one sessions because I feel like presence is incredibly healing, and it's a big part of what I'm about is community building in the local community. Not worldwide or on the internet, but having actual physical presence. I think is an important aspect of shamanic work. So I prefer not to do distance work. I prefer to do in-person work, but I find that I do a lot of distance work, and it's just because of the nature of the world that we live in today. But even when I do distance work, I find that does not resonate with me, that style of just having somebody lay down and then me going into the astral realm or the spiritual realm and doing the shamanic work that I know how to do. I'm capable and confident, and I've done it many times, and I feel I'm very adept at that. But to do that and then to just come back an hour later and tell the person, okay, it's finished, go about your way, thanks for the money, it doesn't feel sufficient to me. And I'm not saying that this shaman that she paid to do this hour-long distance session, that he did nothing. He went and took her money and went and watched TV and then came at the end and called her and said, okay, it's finished. I believe genuinely in integrity, that he believes in integrity, that he was doing the work, that he really truly dedicated his hour and went in and did the shamanic work for her. I truly believe that. But for me, I understand how healing happens, how it's integrated, how it's, accepted. And also I've made videos before talking about healing and how this works. There has to be a sort of tilling of the soil, that person has to be ready to even receive the healing. So before I'm even ready to go into the spiritual realm and do any kind of work, I have to till and tend to that. Sort of prepare the ground and make it ready and rich and fertile to receive that seed. So how I work is very, very different, and it's really got me sort of thinking too a lot about the intersection between psychotherapy and the psychotherapeutic model in the West and shamanism. And, here's another interesting thing, this whole thing of Mongolian shamanism has just come up and been kind of in my face a lot lately. There's particular reasons for that I don't want to get into. But this week it took me back to the time when I watched The Horse Boy, which was several years ago. The Horse Boy is a story about Rowan and Rupert Isaacson. Rupert is, and Kristen Neff too is the mother. Rupert Isaacson is a father, who had an autistic son, Rowan. And Rupert has done a lot of work, with indigenous societies and different cultures and this and that. So he was very knowledgeable and understanding about shamanism and shamanistic cultures. And because they were having such difficulty with Rowan when he was young, him and his wife Kristen set off on this long journey. They didn't actually just go to Mongolia. The Horse Boy documentary, which I believe is on Amazon, it's streaming on Amazon right now. It really just shows them going to Mongolia, taking Rowan to Mongolia to be healed by Mongolian shamans. In actuality, the Isaacsons went many different places and saw many different healers and shamans in search of healing for Rowan and his autism. But it took me back to the time of watching that documentary several years ago, and how interesting it was to me. They had 9 Mongolian shamans that came around the family and did this work. I watched it again yesterday just to refresh my memory and make sure that as I was talking about it, that my memory of it was as accurate and as fresh as it could be, because I really do want to get into this and the difference between other types of shamanism and quote-unquote Western shamanism. So these 9 shamans all encircled the family. They drummed over them. They had their, very culture-specific Mongolian shaman costumery on. There's specific words for these things. And they all sort of did their part, did their little thing, did their shamanic healing, did this and that. They had specific prescriptions for the family. If you watch it, it's really interesting. It's probably the most interesting part of the documentary, in my opinion, is just watching the shamans and how they worked and the things that they were saying and what they were doing. But to make the long story short, in a nutshell, what they basically diagnosed was that Rowan's autism, or his inability to integrate his autism, was in part due to a female ancestor on the mother's line that was lingering around Rowan and sort of tormenting him. She was very unhappy and she was sort of tormenting him, and that was what was causing, his constant tantrums and, his difficulties in adjusting with life. So they kind of did some psychopump work and moved her along. They also said that the mother, Kristen, when she was pregnant with Rowan, that a darkness entered her womb. So they went and had her do some ritual cleansing of her vagina, several different times. And then the family was to follow up with these daily rituals for a period of days to sort of seal in, the psychopump work that the shamans had done. And so collectively, all 9 shamans agreed on the diagnosis that that's what the problem was. So they all worked on it on that level. So here's the thing. The Isaacsons make claim that, Rowan came back a better person after going through the shamanic healing, that his tantruming and his, inconsolability greatly improved, that he stopped going to the bathroom in his pants, and so they did see some improvements. But his autism was not cured. And in fact, a couple months ago, because we don't live very far, we live in the Austin, Texas area, and the Isaacsons live out past Elgin, which is like east of Austin, so they don't really actually live that far from us. Jared and I have been out to the Horse Boy Ranch several times, and a couple months ago we actually saw the Isaacsons at the Celtic Fair in Austin. So we were able to see Rowan, who is almost 16 years old now. In fact, he may be 16 by now. So he's grown up considerably since the Horse Boy was made, and he still, has all the signs of autism. These Mongolian shamans weren't able to cure his autism. So it's an interesting thing, though, to witness how they work. And some people will think, well, they're shamans, they did the work, they cleared, the ancestral thing that was happening, and, that they clearly did something. They all mutually agreed on a diagnosis. But as I was stepping back and really thinking about, okay, what do these Mongolian shamans really do? And what's their cultural view? What's their cosmology? What's their sort of, shamanism is the religion in Mongolia. So what was that really happened? And how is it that they all came to a consensus? Was that like really? And so here's what I want to say about it. When shamanism is so ingrained in your culture for centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries, and it's all actually the state religion, so to speak, it's the way that people live their lives. When they have any kind of problem, they go and see shamans. You know, when it's so ingrained like that, it's almost like when we go to a psychiatrist and they have the DSM, and there it is, the book in black and white, and here's this code for this and that code for this, and here's the list of symptomology down beneath, you know. And so the psychiatrists become very adept at understanding the DSM, at understanding what the symptomology is going off the checklist in their head as their patient is talking to them. Okay, this symptom, this symptom, this symptom. Let me ask about this. Oh, this symptom too. Okay, here's the diagnosis. They become very adept at that system. You know, and I have to imagine that the Mongolian shamans similarly have a system. But, you know, the thing that I ask really within myself is let's just say hypothetically that I was going to practice Mongolian shamanism here in the United States. And I put on this really scary, elaborate, eccentric costume, and I went and drummed, and I, you know, did all this and used these ritual instruments, and, you know, I got my whip out, and I made my, you know, clients get on their hands and whipped them as these shamans did to the Isaacsons. Let's just say that I did this. I went through this whole thing. Okay, first of all, the majority of the people in the United States would be terrified of that. I probably would not have very many people coming to me for help, because that's a pretty terrifying thing to go through. You know, and I think people get intimidated anyway when you say shamanic or shaman, because they don't know what it is. And as soon as you start saying ritual, they get wobbly in the knees anyway. So if I was to act like that and come out with in this fullness of power and doing this, you know, real ritualistic stuff and, you know, hitting them with the whips, and I'm pretty sure they'd be terrified, and I'm pretty sure that they wouldn't go tell their friends, hey, I went and saw a shaman, it was an awesome experience, you go do it too. I'm pretty sure. The second aspect of that is, would that actually be effective in our culture, in our Western culture? You know, I've made many videos before, and I believe the last one I made, I talked about healing and how healing works. And again, it goes to that concept of, you know, sort of tilling the soil and preparing it and getting it ready to receive. You know, and so it's really interesting to me, because so many people that are in my shamanic circles and who are doing shamanic training with me are psychotherapists. They're master degreed, licensed, in practice psychotherapists. And so it's a curious thing of what is drawing psychotherapists into shamanism. You know, well, there's a whole personality structure that has to do with the shamanic archetype and all of that sort of lends to that. But on another level too, I have to ask, like, where's the intersection in the work between psychotherapy or psychotherapeutic model and a shamanistic model? You know, I think it's really just a matter of crossing over. But, you know, there's a really gray area too, because as a shamanic practitioner, I go into the spiritual realm. I do this every day, and I do work for people on behalf of people for their because they've asked me. Every day I do this. How do I really know? I know when I go into the spiritual realm that I'm in the spiritual realm. I've had many, many, many realistic experiences with deities and guides, and, you know, that have evoked feelings and physical responses in my body. And so to me, this is 100% real. But how do I know when I'm actually doing work on behalf of somebody who's come to me for help? How do I know as they're just laying there and I'm over here having this wild and crazy experience in the spiritual realm? How do I know that they're experiencing that there's connection to that they're feeling that? And how do I know that my experience isn't isolated? That it really isn't just me and my imagination going and doing this work, and then there's really no effect for it. You know, see, the problem is that in shamanic cultures such as Mongolia, the entire culture is animistic. So the whole belief system is structured and built around that. In the United States, we are not an animistic culture. We are a rational materialist culture. We think in a very rational materialist way. And so if you have an animistic shaman with a rational materialist American that's seeking shamanic help, the two things aren't really going to intersect in a way that actually puts a seed of healing in the person. This is why I say there's some tending that has to be done. And, you know, here's another thing, is that I hear a lot lately that, oh, shamans can be witches, shamans are this, shamans are that, shamans can be, you know, in actuality, shamanism as a practice, it supersedes all religion and all culture. You know, and this is the thing about Michael Harner's work that I personally find amazing is that he understood that, and he sought to sort of rise above at a higher quantum level over all the cultures that he went to and that he studied, to rise above that and take out of those the core elements and aspects, and he put that together in a way and brought it to the United States and handed it to us as a gift and said, here is the core that exists in every single culture. And so in that sense, I do believe that shamanism does exist at a higher, more archetypal level than the level of the culture, the level of the society, the level of the particular traditions and cosmologies and all of that. But at the same time, because of how healing actually works, it is intimately bound to it and cannot ever be extricated from it. The two things cannot be extricated. You know, even in terms of Western shamanism, I'll get into that in a minute, how I perceive Western shamanism to be different. But even in terms of Western shamanism as a whole, you know, is a shaman that's living in an urban area of New York going to look like, act like, or practice like a shaman that's living in the Appalachian Mountains? Or the shaman that's living in, you know, the northern Pacific coast, or a shaman that's living in, you know, the bayous of Louisiana, or the Keys of Florida, or the fields of Kansas, or the mountains of Montana. No, there's going to be differences. Just as in the United States, we've experienced different accents, you know, over the years, you know, the South Carolina accent, the Texas accent, the California accent, the New Jersey accent, the New York accent, you know, the Fargo, North Dakota accent. You know, there's been a whole range of cultures and experiences and accents and flavors in the United States. So even in Western shamanism, you're going to have a whole range of shamanic expression. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing. And I fully believe that's how it's supposed to be, because the shaman serves the tribe. So it's more than just on a soul level of the soul tribe, but literally in the community, feet on the ground where they are. They serve their tribe. So their tribe is going to be of their same sort of cultural experience and understanding, the same sort of accent. So now getting into Western shamanism and how I think that it's fundamentally different is because we are not an animistic society. And some people will say animism and shamanism are like two bedfellows and they can't be separated. And if you're not animistic, you're not shamanistic. I do not agree with that at all. Because in essence, that's leaving no pathway for shamanism in the United States at all, ever. It's like closed door, that's it, it's over. I think that we can have and experience animistic elements in our shamanic expression and bring those into a way that makes sense in a rational materialist culture. For us in the West, our elders, our shamanic forefathers, are certainly people like Carl Jung. You know, some people think that he was a shaman. If you're familiar with his work, if you're familiar with the Red Book, he's the one that gave us this idea of archetypes, and he's the one that went on these incredible inner journeys in shamanic consciousness. He went into the underworld and he met guides, and, you know, it informed his work with his own patients, you know, and so some people think that Carl Jung was a shaman. He certainly is a potential big part of our shamanic lineage in the West, in our rational materialist culture, that the model of health, of wellness, of spiritual wholeness has been based entirely on religious systems and psychotherapeutic models. You know, so he comes out of that psychotherapeutic model, and he offered us so much, you know, wisdom and insight and understanding on different things, different aspects of ourselves. You know, and another part of that is that as Americans, you know, we're very self-determined. We don't experience this in shamanistic cultures that are very tribal. They don't have a sense of ego. They don't have a sense of self in the same way that we do. You know, they're very community-oriented. So everything is done for the greater good of all. You know, we're very self-deterministic. You know, and I've talked about this before as well, how it's really difficult for shamans in the West to be identified, to be raised up, to be mentored, you know, to be called initiates, because we don't have that system where everybody in the tribe goes, oh, look, Johnny over there, he's got this, that's going on, oh, that's going on, oh, maybe Johnny's a shaman. And then the tribe gets together and decides, yep, Johnny's a shaman. and the shaman says, okay, Johnny, come on, come under my wing, you know, or however that works. You know, it works differently in different cultures, actually. But in our culture, it will never work like that, most likely, because we're very self-determined. You know, we want to be a teacher. We go to school to be a teacher. So that self-determination, you know, is really about self-definition, and it's very self-driven. And so because of that, you know, our shamanism is going to be reflected by that. And when we're dealing with self, we're dealing with ego, we're dealing with a shadow, we're dealing with all these sort of components, psychological complexes, and all these things. So for our shamans, that's a big part of becoming a shaman, is grasping all that, understanding all that, doing all that self-work, that alchemical transmutation. And I think that in shamanistic societies, it happens like that as well, but they don't frame it like that. You know, the initiation process is the same, and that's how it's universal and archetypal. In every culture, I think the initiation process is the same. It really, truly is the same. You know, there's tests, there's shamanic deaths, and all of these things that someone must go through, that initiate must go through to become, you know, the fully embodied shaman who is of service to their community. But how we process through those, how we integrate them, the story we tell about them, the cosmology around them, all of that is going to be different. In our culture, it's a very psychotherapeutic, Western European, alchemical model. I don't think that that's a bad thing, and I'm not saying anything is one, and I'm not saying any one thing is more superior than any other thing, or I'm not saying any of that. I'm just comparing and contrasting the differences and talking about how I see Western shamanism as being fundamentally different than how shamanism is expressed in more indigenous, animistic, shamanistic societies. And so fundamentally, what that's going to mean for me, because this is my view on it as a shamanic practitioner, is a lot of what I do is going to look like that tending, you know, that may be more psychotherapeutic work. And I want to be careful in using that term and presenting myself that way, because I do have a master's degree, but it's not in psychology. I'm not a licensed counselor or therapist. I've thought a million times about going back to school and doing that. But for me, I just feel like I'm on the shamanic path. For me, it's very much like lay midwifery and my path that I took in being a student at the Ancient Art Midwifery Institute versus, you know, going to an actual college of nurse midwifery and becoming a nurse midwife. It's two different paths. One is much more allopathic, medical modeled, credentialed, and the other path is a much more sort of heart-centered, people-centered way of doing it. And so for me, you know, the idea of sitting in a chair all day and you know, listening to people talk as I'm helping them work through stuff, although there is a certain level of that I'm doing now in essence, but to do that, to put the shingle up, to go through that licensing process, and, you know, to do all that, I can't, that's not in my path. It feels inconsistent to me. But like I said, I have a lot of friends in my circles who are doing that and who are now coming to shamanism and trying to sort of bridge that gap that they're feeling in their own practice of psychotherapy. You know, they feel like what they're doing isn't quite efficient, you know, and so they want to learn more. I really think the marriage of the two things in Western shamanism is not inconceivable. I think that on some level that's necessary. I personally, you know, going back to this woman that was telling me her experience of the distance healing, I personally could not work like that. I just, it doesn't feel ethical to me. It doesn't feel complete to me. I would definitely want to follow up and talk about the experience and how I could help integrate that. I would definitely be asking the spirits for any specific prescriptions for this person, and I would be bringing those back, and I would be telling her, you know, here's the prescriptions, here's what the spirits want, you know, think that you should do, here's why, because here, you know, here's what's potentially going on with you, and here's how you work on that. I mean, there would be discussion happening, and I would be holding this person accountable for their own healing. All I would be doing is be bringing back the seed of potentiality and placing it in that soul seat and saying, okay, here's the seed, I retrieved it, I put it back, now let's tend it, you know. And if you need help tending that, I'll walk alongside with you for a little time, but you know, there has to be more than just than what was offered, you know, to this woman who went through this experience, you know. And again, I have to wonder if this woman actually, you know, made this arduous journey through the hills into Mongolia and met with shamans there and presented the same problems that she presented to the shaman that did the distance work for her. And they drummed over her and did all the things as they did for the Isaacsons and for Rowan. You know, I have to wonder if she would walk away from that experience and you know, have any perceived shift or healing occur for her, even in that, you know, because she comes at it from a very Western, rational, materialist mindset. You know, and so that's the thing. That's my practice, you know, and it goes back to, you know, what I was saying about shamans being witches, shamans being Christians, shamans being whatever. I'm none of those things, and I'm all of those things. If somebody comes to me and they're seeking help, the first thing that I want to do is assess what's their belief system. You know, and I'm going to try to address it within their belief system. Because if I'm like coming over them and trying to feed them my belief system, there's going to naturally be a resistance there. And I can tell you already that the likelihood that healing is going to occur is much less. So in a sense, to me, Western shamans have to be all things to all people in a very different way than shamans in other cultures have to experience it. You know, because we have this wide range, this whole entire, you know, eclectic melting pot of cultures and religions and races and experiences and, you know, income level, all these things. These are the things that people bring to it. You know, their own stories that they're telling themselves about. Why am I here? Why do I need healing? What happened to me? What's going on with me? What do I want to achieve out of this? All of these things play into it in a much more complex and dynamic way, I think, that than, you know, indigenous shamans might actually experience. So in a lot of ways, it is harder for us, you know. I'm not saying we're better. I'm saying in a lot of ways it's harder for us. You know, even the amount of sorcery, I can't even tell you how much dark magic I have to extract and remove from people when they come to me. That's almost like the first thing that we have to work on. And that's part of that tending and getting ready that has to occur, is I have to, you know, really get in there and figure out, because these people have been through multiple avenues trying to get help here and here and here and here. And in a lot of ways, they've just compounded, you know, their issue more and more and more and more, especially if they're like going and seeing psychics and things like this. And they're having readings and, you know, they're telling me this, they're telling me this, they're telling me this. These are all curses upon curses upon curses. And I have to like go in there and really start removing all that stuff and tilling that soil and getting it ready for that seed to come in to where they can really be seated in themselves and start healing and growing, you know. And I'm certainly and I'm certain that indigenous shamans also deal with a lot of dark sources and forces and malevolent things, and, you know, they work with it on certain levels, but they have a different understanding. You know, for us in the West, it's coming at us from every angle, on TV, music videos, just every social media. It's coming from us from every angle. We're almost inundated with the amount of information and access that we have. So it complicates the work that we do in the West as shamans. You know, we have to take account 10 different levels, you know, and if someone's talking to me, I'm assessing it on every level that's available to me in my consciousness at that moment. So when I'm listening, you know, I'm listening on every level, you know, and I'm, you know, just tuning in. And it's incredibly exhausting work, and it's so complex. And I feel that the relationship that we enter into with people that come to us for help has to reflect that, and also be equally honoring and somewhat complex in that sense. I mean, I would hope that I bring to it a simplicity, because I'm doing the work of disentangling and hearing all that stuff and, you know, feeding it back out in a simple way that just speaks right into the heart of the problem. But that's the thing. Me just drumming over somebody for an hour and then coming out and say, okay, it's finished. It's not sufficient. That's not sufficient. I would say that the person that actually is efficient for and that it works for in the West is the rare person. And so some people would say, well, that's because you're not a powerful shaman. If you were a powerful shaman, then it would work. No, because that's just not how healing works. I would never, ever, ever assert my power over somebody in such a way I mean, at that point, even if that person is asking you to do that, at that point, that is sorcery. You know, to me, shamanism comes in from underneath and lifts people up. It doesn't power over and put them down. You know, even if that looks like healing and bettering of somebody, if you're asserting your authority and power over somebody and coming down on them to affect change, at that point, to me, that's magic and that's sorcery. It's not truly shamanism. You know, shamanism to me is to come up under someone and lift them up, to empower them, to seat their soul, to provide them wholeness, integration, you know, and that's how the healing occurs. It has to come from the inside out and not the outside in. So I can go inside and help do that work and tend it and do all that, but I'm never the one to, from the outside, try to apply this thing and force it in. It doesn't work like that. You know, you end up actually hurting people more than you're helping them. So this is my take on Western shamanism. And as I said, there's not going to be a lot of information on it. It's cutting edge stuff, you know, how we're talking about it and how the conversation's going and how people are understanding it and, you know, the sort of integration and, you know, all these things. What I really want to do is reach out to one of my therapist friends, and I think I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to shoot her an email and see if she's interested in either doing a live chat with me, or I have a feeling she might want to remain anonymous, possibly, but I'm going to offer her that. I think maybe, if not in a live video chat, maybe we'll work out something. I want to see if I can interview her and share that on my channel, just talking about intersection between psychotherapy and shamanism, and as a psychotherapist, what led her into shamanism, and, you know, all these kind of questions. I think it would be really interesting to see somebody who is actually a licensed, you know, therapist in practice, and she deals with some really tough clients, you know, some clients with dissociative identity disorder and you know, a whole kind of range of trauma and stuff. So yeah, I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to reach out to her, and I hope that she is willing to do that, and that I can offer that on my channel. So maybe that'll, you know, give some insight into Western shamanism and how it might be different than shamanism in other cultures. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to me sort of work this out and meander around in my thoughts, and I always appreciate you guys watching me. Reach out to me if you're looking for a shamanic practitioner, you're in the Austin, Texas area, or you're willing to drive into the area. I am in local practice, and I would absolutely love to meet you. I'd be honored. If you're not, like I said, I do distance work, and I'm more than willing to do that with you. I prefer to do that in some type of live video feed, so whether that's Skype or Messenger or some way. But we can work it out, so just get a hold of me in all the different ways you'll find on my channel to get a hold of me. And I love you guys so much. If you have questions, comments, leave them down below. And if you could help me build my channel, I'd appreciate a quick thumbs up, or share this video if you found it interesting or resonated with you in any way, or you just want to get the conversation started. I appreciate it so much. And again, I love you guys so much. Thank you.